Our first session is chaired by Caspar Melvine. Caspar would introduce the panel. Would you like to come over, Caspar? Can I just remind you, if somebody phones and your mobile is on, tell them I'm not here. And can we also ask people not to take photographs? We'll have everything on the website. You could download the whole session. And we'll have photographs you could download as well. Okay. Thank you. First session.
Thank you. Panelists, do you want to come and sit at the table and I'll introduce you when you sit down? Let's try and get this. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be chairing the first session, which is on apostasy laws and the right to criticise and renounce religion. My brief for this session, which will last about, I think, an hour and a half, is to do a question time-like format. Most of you will be familiar, I think, with the British television programme Question Time, which makes me one of the Dimblebees, I suppose, for my sins, which are many. What I intend to do, therefore, is I will introduce our very distinguished panel to you, first of all, and I will ask some of them, perhaps not all of them right at the beginning, to say something around a series of questions to do with apostasy. I think we should start with apostasy and try and get a sense of what we're really talking about and what it means historically and what it means currently. And then I'm going to open to the floor and I'm going to ask the audience to ask questions of the panel. I am going to insist that your statements are questions and that you don't take too long about it. And so forgive me if I appear to be bullying or irascible, but I'm just being a Dimbleby. Then what I'm going to do is try and devote the second half of our discussion more to the issue of criticising religion and the right to renounce. And I expect that we should be able to have a very lively debate about that. If need be, I am prepared to play devil's advocate. I mean, we're in a party of people who are, very distinguished secularists. Perhaps we're not all of the same opinion, we're all free thinkers, but I do think we should try and get to, the heart of the differences between us as well as what we agree about. So, to start with, I'm going to go from this end, and I'm going to introduce a very distinguished panel. I don't think you could get a better selection of people to be talking on this subject. So, starting just on my immediate left is Ehsan Jami. I'm not going to give you a full biography. You have the biographies in your pack. What I know about Ehsan Jami is that he is a local Dutch politician who has his own particular experiences of apostasy in relation both potentially to Islam but also to Dutch politics and the Labour Party, of which he is a former member, I expect, now member of what I think is known as the Fraction Jami, a small but possibly growing political party, and perhaps we can talk about that a bit later. From Holland, is that right? Sure. Sitting next to him is Hannah Stinson, who is my good friend and colleague, who is the Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association, amongst other things. On her left is the very distinguished philosopher and author A.C. Grayling. Many of you will be familiar with his work. I won't list his books, we haven't got enough time. On his left, we have got Farabouz Poya, who you've just heard from, who, among other things, and his involvement with the ex-Muslims, is the head of the Iranian Secular Society. On his left is Ibn Warwick. This is a particular pleasure for me to be chairing a panel with Ibn on it. He's a very distinguished author who's written a great many books, many with Prometheus books in the States, including most recently Defending the West, which is a critique of Edward Said, and I think coming up is Which Quran? Is that right? 2008? Or perhaps, is that out already? No. Okay. So hopefully Ibn can help us get a handle on what the Quran says about these issues. And you've already met, in a way, virtually, Mina Ahadi, who's sitting right at the end. Welcome. And she is such an important figure in this movement, and we're thrilled to have you here. So, I think where we should start is with this issue of apostasy, but I think we'd like to get a kind of historical perspective on it. So when I want a pithy historical perspective on things, I tend to reach for my A.C. Grayling book on my shelf, so I'm going to reach for my A.C. Grayling now and ask, is apostasy something which is distinct only to Islam? And what can you tell us about what it actually means in relation to religious belief in general? And I'm going to ask you just to speak for a couple of minutes on that subject.
Sure. The idea of punishing people who are betrayers of some community bond is as ancient as human society. If you look at the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, you see there very, very stringent attacks on the idea of repudiating the religious bond and membership of that community. So, for example, anybody who repudiates the religion can be taken out and stoned to death. There are secular or quasi-secular forms of apostasy, of course, as well in the political and other arenas. And the religious and the quasi-secular come together in Rome, in ancient Rome, where not to observe the community religious rites, given that religion for the Romans was not a personal matter, not a relationship between an individual and a deity or deities, but a system of bonds that brought the community together and kept them loyal to its objectives. But if you didn't sign up for those, you would get into trouble. And in fact, in the early centuries of Christianity, Christians were regarded as apostates by the Roman state and were persecuted because they wouldn't participate in the Roman rituals. But our greatest familiarity, at least in the Western tradition for a very long time, was Christian apostasy. Any form of heterodoxy was regarded as heresy, so it's a different matter from apostasy, and could be punished by death or by lesser forms of penalty. But to repudiate your religion altogether, to leave it altogether, was regarded as the very worst of crimes. This is because in the documents of Christianity, this is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, which is meant to be the thing that serves as the vehicle of God's grace or of your submission to God or whatever. So to be apostate, to reject the religion as a whole, was one of the very worst things that you could do, and of course it invited death. So it's a very familiar feature. It's a sort of structural feature, really, of the kind of monolithic control exercised by religion over the minds and lives of individual people. So very familiar, very, very long-standing feature of human community.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think I'd like to ask Ibn Warwick now to talk briefly about, I mean, I'm interested in two aspects really of this, because clearly the issue of Islam and apostasy in relation to Islam is so vital. First of all, I'm interested in what the Quran says about, since you've written a book about the Quran recently, presumably you can tell us something about what the Quran says about it, and then just give us a sense of how that has been taken on by various Islamic countries. I mean, are there laws against this on the statute books in countries, or is it something which is exercised culturally? How does that work, and how does that distinct in different places?
Right. The Quran, as ever, is rather vague and contradictory on this issue. But there are some scholars, well-known scholars like Al-Shafi, who do take some verses. I don't have the references here.
We'll take your word. A number of verses which have been interpreted to mean that apostasy should be punished by death. But there is, however, there is consensus amongst the four major schools of law in Sunni Islam and amongst one of the Shia schools. And there are some exceptions, some medieval theologians, like, surprisingly, Ibn Taymiyyah, who don't consider the death penalty justified in the case of apostasy. But it's significant also that when Eleanor Roosevelt and others were discussing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, it was Charles Malik who insisted on Article 18, which guarantees freedom of religion. He was aware the problems caused by Muslims converting to Christianity, because he was from Lebanon and he had experience of this personally. But the Islamic countries objected, particularly Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And ever since then, the Saudis and others, again Egypt, have always tried to either water down this clause, Article 18, or remove it. And of course, the two main Islamic declarations of human rights, the Universal Islamic Declaration of Human Rights of 1981, I think it was, and the Cairo Declaration of 1990,
both of them don't have this clause. They're either vague or they just don't mention the right to change one's religion. And the other very quick survey of the Islamic countries, there's nothing specific on the penal code, in the penal codes of various Islamic countries, but that does not mean that apostasy is tolerated. On the contrary, the lacunae are filled by references to the Sharia, and you get daily reports around the world of how apostasy is recommended for anybody who has transgressed and so on. I had just 2 days ago, I had a letter sent to me about a Jordanian poet who's apostasy. I noticed also a news report in September of this year that Iran was going to actually specifically pass a law, make it more explicit, although already all sorts of people have been persecuted, imprisoned and even executed for apostasy.
On this question of the legal status, in relation to that poet, I think it's true that it's a kind of a private prosecution that's being brought rather than the state prosecution, that someone pops up and says, what you've done is offensive to me as a Muslim or to Islam. And is that right? That it's not so much...
Yes, but many of these constitutions in the Islamic countries, they always have an all-embracing clause saying as long as everything is in conformity with Sharia or the Quran. So if somebody makes enough fuss, it's true the government has to step in and apply.
And is it true also that under these laws, then the government are allowed to immediately arrest with no evidence and put someone on trial? There's a kind of different kind of status for evidence and the prosecution of these cases than might apply in others. Or is that true in...
Well, it obviously varies from country to country,
yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's very, very fascinating. Thank you. I'm going to move on swiftly, but I just want to ask Farabuz, who I think I'm right in saying grew up in Iran. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
I mean, growing up in Iran, just give us a little taste. Was it something that you ever heard or saw someone renouncing Islam? Or was it something which was more possible then than it is now, or less? I mean, how did it happen with you?
I think the case of Iran is very interesting because Iran is not an Islamic society, and is a society that Islam, following the defeat of the 1979 revolution, Islam was imposed on the society. So you'll see the transformation, how in an organized manner, religion is being brought into all aspects of the society. We were more interested in Cat Stevens than use of Islam in the 70s. But we'll see the shift, how that is actually brought in. Many people lived a life without Islam, and they were happily going on with their lives, and following the defeat of the revolution, we had the Islamic government actually taking power. So it's a very interesting experiment in terms of Islam wasn't bubbling from beneath. It just actually took political power first and then imposed it. And the first group of people were Muslim. And in case of apostasy, many and thousands of people actually who imprisoned and they were killed by the government, it was done under the apostasy law, that you are against the God and Allah. And that was the charge that was stuck to them, and then immediately, without much trial, they were executed. So,
and that was being used as a cover almost for all kinds of other political crimes. And
then, and that's I think apostasy really today functions as a means in the hands of a very, very reactionary fascist movement to control society and population, and basically anybody who wants to actually demand basic of lives that everybody takes for granted is branded as apostasy against the religion. You can't criticize any of the situation in Iran. Immediately is linked to the head of the state, and head of the state is shadow of the God. So it is systematically linked.
Thank you. I just want to, a couple of quick questions. I'm going to talk to Isan and also Mina, and then I'm going to throw it open. We've been talking a little bit about what the Quran says about how religion historically has exercised this power as a state power almost, but what we're talking about in the European context is, as it were, the kind of outsourcing of this state power into the hands of whoever might feel that they are doing the work of, by threatening the lives of people who renounce religion. Do you want to give us just a taste of your experiences and in relation to these issues and how what it looks like in Holland?
Well, as many people perhaps know, we had murder of Theo van Gogh, and another one was Pim Fortuyn. So the political climate in my country, Holland, is actually on the edge. There's actually, you can't, I think in all the countries in Europe, you can feel the best in Holland how the caste of civilization actually works. You see the right-wing politicians and conservatives coming up in the polls, and the people in Holland itself, they are actually, they feel that there is a tendency going on against, Islamic movement, actually. Anything that is Islamic. In the government, people that are wearing headscarf, they're banned actually from the government. And the double nationality, double loyalty, actually is, this kind of discussion is actually coming up in my country, which is actually quite good. And to mention that what you said about threats, well, my country is actually quite normal to get 24 hours police protection now. It wasn't normal like 6 years ago, but now it's quite normal after the death of Theo van Gogh. Every politician now who has an opinion on Islam gets police protection, which is absurd. So, in my case, last year, there were 3 guys who were coming up, and I was with a friend of mine. They tried to hurt me, and actually they did, but in a physical way. And immediately, the day after, you get a police protection, and that actually never stops, because there's always a threat that, people might hurt you. So that's my experience actually on that subject.
I'm going to ask Mina just to before I throw it open to the floor. It's obviously, it's a very tricky issue, but I'm interested in the people who threaten you, the people who feel it's their right to punish those who have renounced Islam. How are they being empowered? Are they funded by foreign governments? Are they carrying around fatwas in their pocket? Or are they picking this up off the internet? How organized is it? And how threatening is it?
Ich bedanke mich sehr viel zuerst. Heute ist 10. Oktober, Tag gegen Todesstrafe, und ich möchte zuerst an alle denken, die wegen Apostasie ermordet worden sind in sogenannte islamische Länder.
Today is 10th of October, it's International Day Against the Death Penalty, and I would like to remember all the people who have been killed in the name of apostasy or for apostasy.
In verschiedenen Ländern werden die Menschen umgebracht, zum Beispiel Sudan, Jemen, Iran, Saudi-Arabien, Katar, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia und Mauretanien. Wegen Apostasie, die Menschen werden schon umgebracht.
In the various countries, people are being killed because of apostasy, and that is, for example, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Jordanien, Somalia, Afghanistan.
Also ich denke, wir reden über ein sehr wichtiges politisches Problem und nicht Personal- oder Privatproblem.
I think we are talking about a very important political issue and not a personal issue.
Vor 30 Jahren, ich habe im Iran gesagt, ich bin nicht mehr Muslim, aber ich wurde nicht umgebracht oder es gab keine Fatwa damals.
30 years ago in Iran I said I'm no longer a Muslim, and there was no fatwa against me and nobody tried to kill me.
In 2007 zum Beispiel in Deutschland haben wir diese Bewegung angefangen, und wir haben am meisten von uns haben wir Security.
When we started this movement in 2007 in Germany, most of us had police protection because we were threatened.
Meine Antwort ist, das ist eine politische Movement, die islamische Organisationen und islamische Regierungen und auch die europäischen Regierungen machen mit und deswegen wir sind in Gefahr in Europa.
My answer is that the Islamic organizations and Islamic governments, but also the Western governments, they are going along with it, and that's why we're in this situation.
Also wir reden über ein Problem im 21. Jahrhundert, das ist eine politische, internationale Problem und deswegen das ist sehr wichtig, über diese Menschen reden, die in Gefahr sind, im Iran, im Irak, in Afghanistan und auch in London und auch in Berlin.
We're talking about a movement in the 21st century, and such it is very important that we're talking about the human beings who are in danger in Iraq, Afghanistan, and also here.
Apostasy also Todesstrafe gegen Apostasy ist ein sehr wichtiges Instrument, das die Menschen in verschiedenen Ländern zu schweigen bringt. Und das ist ein sehr wichtiges Instrument, Diktatorregierungen gegen Menschen.
The death penalty for apostasy is a very important tool in the hands of governments to silence people.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open it to the floor for questions. We do have a roving mic. I don't know if we have a roving mic operator for the moment, so bear with us. I haven't forgotten you, Hannah, and I will come back. So we're going to have I'm going to give over about 10 minutes to ask questions on this particular subject. If you want to ask a particular panelist, please identify them. Please identify yourself when you start asking your question. And as I said, keep it to a question, and then we'll move on to the larger issues of a plural society and criticising religion. So has anyone got any questions for the moment? There's a gentleman up there who, good luck getting the mic up there. I think you might just have to speak loudly. Can you just speak and we'll see if we can hear you? I'm not sure. Hang on 1 second, sorry. To take someone up. So shall I give you a few minutes? Okay. Is someone take? Okay. If we got someone on this ground floor, we'll come back to upstairs when we get a mic sorted out. Is there someone down here that? Oh, is he? Okay. Excellent. The young man there. Yes, please.
Thanks. I'm Usman, a student. I just wanted to ask. I mean, obviously, whichever way you look at it, outright atheists and humanists in the Muslim world are in a minority. So, I mean, I wanted to know what the panel thought about, you know, obviously to get the apostasy laws overturned. In the end, you're going to have to cooperate with believing Muslims, liberal Muslims, etc., or secular Muslims, however you term them. So I wanted to ask what you thought about cooperation with Muslims who believe, but yet do not support the apostasy laws anymore, who see it as a kind of, I mean, I've had conversations with conservative Muslims who I disagree with religiously, but they tell me, you know, the apostasy laws, you know, they were a political necessity, you know, in the early centuries of Islam because religion and politics were so intertwined then, but that nowadays the apostasy laws are no longer necessary to Islam. So, I mean, how about cooperation with Muslims who support the... That's
a fantastic question. Thank you. I'm going to take a few questions at a time, and then I'll let the panel come back. So I'm not ignoring that because I think that's a really, really important question. There's a gentleman up there in the white shirt. Thank you.
Thank you. The Islamic countries and the Middle Eastern countries, they do dilute the human rights issue. Egypt, for example, signed the International Declaration of Human Rights in 1952, 4 years after its inception, with a proviso that as long as, like Ibn Warraq said, it does not contradict the Islamic Sharia law. By saying that, it really nullified the International Declaration application, and the government in Egypt now leaves the mob to deal with the apostate and leave them to do the dirty job rather than taking them to court. We would like to say if there is any way to highlight this situation from the conference, to highlight the situation where apostates are dealt with by the mob in the Islamic countries, and the governments in the Middle East do not pursue the killers of apostates.
Okay, that's the question. Thank you. That's a very good question as well. I think I'll take one more and then we'll throw it out. Has anyone got a question for the panel? Right at the very back there. Sorry, downstairs. Is this poor guy's running up and down the stairs, is he? Well done. Bear with us for just a second. It is coming. I can see him. He's just disappeared there. He's coming down. Stay standing so he can find you. So I'm just going to summarise the two questions so far. One is about how we can publicise the issue that Islamic countries are allowing mob rule when it comes to punishing renouncers of religion. And the other one is about to what degree should we be collaborating or working together with moderate Muslims against to get rid of apostasy laws. Yes?
I just had a question from Mr. Ehsan Jamil.
Okay.
I was surprised when he said he's happy the questions coming up against to loyalty. I am international. I know my international. So how are you going to fight me? Because I'd be happy to be loyalty to many countries, not only one. And you are happy to stay to even take away to loyalty, stay with one. I just think I don't understand. I'm not happy with that.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so that's a specific question. I think we'll start with that. Just to clarify, I think Ihsan said that he was happy, but he didn't clarify exactly why, because the issue of dual nationality or dual identity was on the agenda in Holland, or had come up on the agenda. And so I'm going to ask you to answer that one specifically, and then I will move on to the other questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. I will declare that. It's quite simple, actually, because double nationality is, in my opinion, double loyalty. That comes if you look at countries like Turkey or Morocco, you see in the book of law from them or the constitution that they have certain loyalty for that country. For example, if a Moroccan guy or a girl, especially a guy who, for example, like Holland goes to war against Morocco, the Moroccan government can also say, look, you have nationality, it's your right to fight for us and not against us. I think that's a bad symbol. I think that's a bad choice. And I think the Moroccan government, the Dutch government must say that when you want to come to live in Holland, you must have one nationality, and that's Dutch nationality, to prevent these kind of things. Also, Turkey has the same thing. In Turkey, people must go to army before they get their Turkish nationality, and that is, I think, contradict with our Western values and where we stand for as a country. I mean, I'm talking about Holland in this matter. I mean, if you could look at the member of parliament in Holland, there are people that have a double nationality. How is that going to work? Are you going to defend our constitution or them? And look at the police member of the police. They have double nationality. And we had 2 weeks ago a case which was in Moroccan policeman who was spying for the Moroccan government because of the double nationality, which brings us again to double loyalty. Who are you loyal to? Your country, which is Holland in this matter, or your former country? And I say, when you come to a country, you assimilate to that society, and you take one passport and one nationality to
Are you saying that you're happy this issue's come up so that you can clarify your position on it? Is that what you mean?
Of course.
And you're in favour of saying and deciding that
one nationality.
One loyalty. Anthony.
So can I just say that there is, of course, a more general aspect to this problem, which is that we are seeing a recapitulation in contemporary Europe, in particular in Europe, of a problem that existed in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe after the Reformation, when the loyalties that were divided were between loyalty to the king or the state and loyalty to the Pope, or loyalty to a religious leader or a religious ideology outside the state. And it caused tremendous tensions and difficulties. Lots of people were persecuted, put to death because they were regarded as having a loyalty to a religious leader outside the state. And to some extent, this is the more general aspect of this problem resurfacing now. if you're a citizen of a country, but you have a very passionate religious commitment of some kind, when the chips are down, which one are you going to defend? And of course, most people, given the nature of religion, are going to go with their religious commitment.
Which poses a problem. I want to ask Hannah, who we haven't heard from yet, and not so much as an expert on Islam, but more as a sort of, in a practical way, because I know this is an issue the BHA deal with all the time, and the issue is, of course, do we try and work against particularly extreme versions of religion by collaborating with moderate religious people? What is the BHA, what can the BHA, what kind of light can you throw on how and to what extent we can work against religious extremism, including Islamic extremism, by working with moderate Muslims or moderate religious people in general?
The policy of the British Humanist Association is very firmly based on both human rights and equality. So it obviously includes the right to religious beliefs as well as non-religious beliefs, and indeed the right to change your belief. Also, of course, a commitment to an open and secular society and to democracy. And I think all those things are very, very closely linked, because you can't actually have freedom, you can't have an open society, you can't have democracy unless you have a secular society, because it's the secular society that gives people that freedom, that doesn't advantage any particular belief. When it comes to working with people who are religious, we do work alongside religious organisations when we share the same objectives. So, for example, we work with religious organisations to reform religious education on the basis that we feel that every child is entitled to learn about other people's beliefs, including, of course, non-religious beliefs, though in school not to be instructed in religious belief, because that's a very different thing. We cooperate with so-called moderate people of all different faiths. But of course you have to be very careful on this one, because if you take an issue like apostasy, it's actually very difficult to cooperate with somebody who actually believes that the law comes from a God. And you cannot cooperate with somebody who doesn't actually share your belief, the absolute belief, in the right to believe whatever you want. And one of the issues that we come up against when, for example, trying to work with not only Muslim people, but also various other religious beliefs, Catholic, Protestant, it tends to be the three religions of the book, Islam, Judaism and Christianity, that have this problem about actually accepting that people can have their own beliefs or can change their beliefs. They all, to different extents, have a problem with that area. So if we're working, for example, with Muslims on the issue of apostasy, certainly when I talk to Muslims, I very often come up against people who believe very firmly, or say they believe very firmly, in human rights, until you actually start talking about this issue. So I think, yes, we should cooperate, but we can only cooperate with those people who are actually firmly committed to human rights.
Prabhus, I want to ask you what your perspective on this is in terms of collaboration. I mean, surely, if the problem is people being put to death by states for renouncing religion, the right way to go about it is to work within the structure of those states, which will inevitably mean with other Muslims, and to support those interpretations of the Quran which say, in fact, that that is not what the Quran calls for and it's un-Islamic to do so. Isn't that the right approach?
Yes, I do. Actually, a lot of people tell me that what you associating with Islam is not true Islam. I am not expert on Islam as such. Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, various muftis in Egypt, they are actually, this is what they're saying, and that's their interview. They have more authority than I do. That's the first point. But yes, I think there are people who do not want to associate themselves with apostasy, and they want to hold their religious beliefs. Fine. Don't tell me. Could you please turn around and your objective is over there in sitting in Tehran, in Egypt, organize a campaign, let me see you run. Don't tell me. Don't turn around. I think that's one of the issues that, for example, Muslim Council of Britain constantly keeps telling us. This is not true Islam. Fine. I've never seen them to organize a campaign against apostasy in any of the countries. They actually only raise their head and voice when we are objecting. So yes, I think there's a scope, everybody is welcome, there's a political fight. Please, let's help us end apostasy everywhere. But you need to shift your angle. It's over there. Okay.
I want to thank you very much for that. I think you've got broad agreement. I want to ask this a different kind of question, which was the other question was asked, which is, it sounds like what we've got going on in many countries, both within Islamic countries and in the West, is a kind of death penalty by proxy. You know, that the actually mobs, random groups of disaffected, you know, youth, men mostly, are doing the work of the Islamic State by threatening and indeed killing people and harming them. What can we do to make this a political agenda, and I suppose in particular to try and put pressure back on those Islamic countries to recognise that they need to punish very strongly vigilante violence, whether it's done in the name of Islam or in the name of any other cause? I want to ask Mina that question.
Ich verteidige jetzt die Menschen in verschiedenen sogenannten islamischen Ländern. Also die sind nicht Terroristen oder Mörder, sondern die Regierungen organisieren und propagandieren einen Terror gegen Apostasy.
I defend the people in the various Islamic countries that they are not the terrorists, they are not the murderers. It is rather the government that are organizing the terror and the killing of apostasy or for apostates.
Ich denke, es gibt in europäischen Ländern ein sehr falsches Bild über Iran, Afghanistan und andere Länder. Und ich denke, hier wird nicht anerkannt. Es gibt eine sehr breite, säkulare, gegenreligiöse Bewegung.
I think there exists a wrong picture of the people in Islamic countries. There's a huge secular movement in these countries, and that has not been recognized here in the West.
Und genau dieses Gesetz, zum Beispiel Todesstrafe, hilft, dass die Menschen dort mundtot machen wegen dieser sehr, sehr breite politische, also säkulare und auch Kritik gegenüber Islam und auch islamische Regierungen.
And this law, this death penalty, ensures that the people that want to speak out, and there are secular people, that they are being silenced by this law.
Ich möchte kurz auch über was Ehsan Jami gesagt hat, etwas erklären. Ich denke, also in europäischen Ländern, wir waren vorher alle Ausländer, also die Leute aus sogenannten islamischen Ländern waren wir Ausländer, aber die letzte Zeit, wir wurden schon Muslim geworden, alle.
I want to briefly talk about what Ehsan said earlier. Before we were all foreigners, and now, recently, we have all become Muslims.
Und diese Etikett haben die Regierungen in England und auch Deutschland und europäische Länder uns gegeben. Alle Leute aus dem Iran, Irak, Afghanistan wurden Muslim genannt.
And this label of Muslim was given to us by the governments here. All these people from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan were suddenly being labeled as Muslims.
Und alle islamischen Organisationen haben das genutzt. Und jetzt haben wir ein Problem mit islamischen Organisationen. Wir haben ein Problem, alle Säkularen, alle Menschen, die hier leben, also die Engländer, die Deutschen und auch die sogenannten Muslime. Wir haben ein Problem mit einer terroristischen Bewegung.
And the Islamic organizations have used this, and now we have a problem here. And not just us, but also all the Germans, the English, the people who live here in these countries. They have a problem with political Islamic terroristic organizations or movement.
Und wir sind alle also gegen diese Terrororganisationen vor Säkularismus, vor Menschenrechte, vor Frauenrechte. Also zwei Front gegeneinander, nicht nationalistische Front, sondern Human Rights Front gegenüber einer faschistischen Bewegung.
And we are all here for women's rights, for secularism, for human rights. And we are all against this other movement, so there are two fronts to this movement.
Menschenrechte und Faschismus.
Human rights against fascism.
Thank you. We're going to move on to a slightly broader subject in a second of the limits or not of freedom of speech and the necessity of criticising religion, renouncing religion. Ehsan wanted to respond, I think, to one of the questions.
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting what he said about cooperation Well, actually, I believe in cooperation in Islamic countries. Yes, I believe you need to cooperate with them, with that countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all the countries that Mina also mentioned. We need to cooperate with them. But as it comes to Europe, I don't believe in cooperation with any other light Muslim or light whatever. You don't need to cooperate because, as I believe, we are defending the constitution of Europe. We are defending our constitution, our country. So if, the Einstein said something quite nice. He said, the most smart people are the ones that make a difficult question give an easy answer. And my easy answer is, if you're not with us, you are against us. So because we are defending the Constitution, and we are holding it for the freedom of religion. So if someone says that, well, I don't believe in it, and a group of Muslims or extremists, they say, well, we don't believe in that, then actually you don't believe in the Constitution of Europe, or for that matter, the country where you live in. And I think that you don't belong in that country, so it's actually quite easy to make a box in it and says everything, which is the Constitution, goes in it, and what doesn't fit, then you don't fit. I think that's the most easy question as it comes to cooperation.
Farabuz wanted to come back on that.
I think that approach would be divisive. The reason is because you gave example of Reformation time. I think the best solution is to keep religion as a private matter and do not bring it on in the public sphere. In the same way that nationality, ethnicity, and various labels should not be counted, and we need to move them out. And if we do not, I think if we follow that logic, then we'll start labeling people, and according to label, we exclude them from mainstream society. People are part of a society irrespective of their political beliefs, irrespective of their religious beliefs, irrespective of their nationality, ethnicity, and various labels. And I think that's a more stronger position to fight the Islamists and the Islamic movement, and that upholds the genuine values of humanism. I think that's a better solution.
Okay, about equal amount of applause for both positions, I'd say. So perhaps we can get to that. Anthony, the plural society. When you're in a sort of homogenous society, which isn't plural, you can afford to have a great deal of laxity about what you say and what you do because everyone has a certain set of values. The more mixed the society becomes, isn't it the case that that society needs to be much more careful about all the different feelings and all the different things that you can say, and actually needs to be much more careful about what it says, particularly so that it doesn't sideline those newcomers or people who are less of a majority? Isn't that the right way to approach the issue of freedom of expression and the right to criticise? And in fact, shouldn't we be much more respectful of those things in a plural society?
Well, first I should declare what we mean by a pluralistic society. A society in which there is a wide margin for lots of different interests, lots of different groups of people, lots of different outlooks. And in such a society, one of the great benefits of it is that very different interests and voices can have their place, can have their little bit of the sun. And such a society is one which cannot work unless deeply entrenched in it are principles of free speech and tolerance. And the point about tolerance is a very interesting one, because tolerance is hard to do. If you don't mind what other people do, what they eat or what they believe and so on, and they don't bother you, then you're not really tolerating them. They're just not annoying you. You're being tolerant when they annoy you, but you recognize that they have a right to do it, and so you've got to do the hard work of letting them do it. But the great paradox of a liberal with a small L attitude towards tolerance is that you're always in danger of tolerating the intolerant in your midst, and you allow it to grow up, and then it becomes a serious problem, because if they're intolerant towards you, and so they threaten this very delicate web of interrelationships that a pluralistic society consists in. And so the one thing that you cannot tolerate is intolerance. And in order to protect against the dangers that intolerance represents, you've got to have structural features of the society. You've got to protect those margins, those latitudes that people have to do and to be what they want. And I think it follows from this that you have to recognize that all interests, including religious interests, have their right to exist and have their right to a say. The great problem, however, with the organized religions like the Catholic Church and the Church of England, and religious movements like Islam, which of course is internally very diverse, is that what they want to do is to encroach more and more in the public domain, get more and more of our tax money for their faith schools, get more and more privileges like being exempt from discrimination laws, and so on and so on. And this is where the battle, the secularist battle, quite separate from the atheist battle or the humanist battle, but the secularist battle has to be fought. To say to religious people, you are just one interest group among many. You're just one voice. You're like a trades union or political party or the Boy Scouts. You've got no greater entitlement than anybody else to have your say. You're entitled to have it, but no greater entitlement. And our problem is that all these movements, and we see it's really been in the last decade or so, it's really been Islam which has taken the first step, muscle its way forward and demand more attention from the public, more of the public ear, more of the public purse. And of course, all the other religions don't want to be left behind, so they're all muscling forward. Now we see in the UK an explosion in the number of faith schools and all sorts of other things happening in society, which are actually very destabilizing and setting up a lot of tensions, threatening the very pluralism that has allowed all this to happen, because we've been insufficiently clear about what it means to be tolerant and accepting and a plural society. But certainly an integral feature of a plural society that people should, in return for being allowed to believe what they like, believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden, but don't bother other people about it.
I'm going to open it up in a minute. I hope you're getting your questions ready, but I want to, just before we go there, I want to ask Ibn Warwick